Okay, welcome back, Pahrump. We're still talking about chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and during the break, the subject of the reversibility of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease has come up, and I kind of advanced in the slideshow, and let me just discuss briefly. COPD is not a reversible disease, and the fact that once the damage has been done to your lung, meaning the lung has expanded. You have, it's like a balloon. Once it pops, it's popped, and it can't be re-put back together again. And that's the best analogy I can use of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Asthma, which causes wheezing and coughing, is a reversible condition. And a lot of times asthma and COPD do go together. Asthma is an inflammatory process, and you would think, well, I said COPD is an inflammatory process, and that is certainly true. And both of them are obstructive. But if you treat your asthma and you treat it correctly and you treat it young enough, it will not affect your lung function. If you do not treat your asthma correctly, then yes, you could suffer some of the same problems that COPD does. But really, you have to look at the term chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and meaning that it obstructs or limits the outflow of air from your lung. So again, if I had a straw and I had a balloon and I was to blow on that straw, the balloon would expand. If I kept blowing on that balloon and not letting the air out, then it eventually would burst. And that's a similar scenario, because what happens is you can blow into your lung and yet you exhale. But if you don't exhale completely, then you air trap. So again, if I had a balloon and I blew it up and I only let out 50% of the air, guess what? 50% remains. Every time I do that, I blow up the balloon a little bit more, and that's the process of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. There are people, and I've seen them, they're very rare, who can smoke and have no signs of lung disease. But I can tell you it's maybe 1 per 10,000. I wouldn't bank that that would be you. Those are slim odds. Okay, so let's go back to the slideshow. I have this picture of, and I'm hoping that you can see that, but to the left of your screen will show what they call a normal epithelium and what we call the healthy mucosa. I would focus on that top slide, that little top segment up there. I don't know if the mouse will go up there, but it doesn't. There it is. If you can focus on this part right here where you see me moving that mouse, that is actually what they call the cilia, or actually the mechanism in our lungs that clears the mucus. We also have goblet cells which actually produce the mucus, and if you go over here to this slide, you can make out a goblet cell which produces mucus, and then on top you can see the mucus lining of the lung, and the little hair cells are called cilia that beat that mucus up out of our lung. Now, when you smoke or you inhale noxious substance, your body responds to that thing called in a process called it basically changes. So let's look at someone who's out in the sun all the time and what happens to their skin. It turns red and dark, and it basically becomes this chronic thick skin. It's a response to continued exposure. That's called metaplasia. And that happens in your lungs. Smoke is a very noxious substance. It irritates the columnar epithelium, which is what this is. Remember, these are columnar epithelium. They're tall, just like a column. And the epithelium, meaning it's basically a mucosal, and it has the hair cells on it. Mixed in with there are the goblet cells. So this is why you have a smoker's cough. Because you're still producing mucus, but you have no hair cells to clear that mucus up out of your lung. Therefore, it hangs in there. Therein lies the process or the beginning of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So here's the next slide, which kind of shows that too, and you can again see the cilia up here, the normal columnar epithelium cells, a bigger picture of what that hair cell looks like right there. And then this diagram shows basically the mucus layer of your lung, lying on there, and the hair cells. It's just another diagram to show that how those hair cells beat in uniform, moving that mucus up out of your lung, and you don't even know what's happening, but the next thing you know, you're just clearing it and you're swallowing it, where your your stomach digests it all and returns it. It's a perfect recycling system. The mucus traps the bacteria, it traps the dust, and if you didn't make mucus, guess what? Probably wouldn't live longer than a couple of days because your lungs would fill up with mucus and all kinds of debris. And there again, this is the actual slide that shows what happens when you inhale. Here's the mucus plug, which is this green area right here, and then the air is flowing over it. The lung expands and basically it opens up, air passes over. As we close our lungs, they collapse. Guess what? It collapses against the mucus plug and air is trapped behind it. That lies air trapping, or the process of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Again, this is COPD. This is actually kind of a picture of normal lung tissue that has not been affected. Here you can see a smoker's lung, the blebs, the burned out sections of chronic exposure, the tar, the nicotines, and all the other, not to mention benzopyrenes and cancer-producing substances that are in that lung. This is basically what we call a pulmonary function test. This is another way to describe what I've been, well, we kind of went the wrong direction with the mouse. But anyway, this describes, if you can see this lung function, and there are some, I don't know how well this shows up on your screen, but basically what we're trying to do is measure how much air you get out in the first second of your breathing. Okay, that's where I'm pointing the mouse right here. This is called the FEV1, forced expiratory volume in the first second of breathing. This would be totally what you get out as you exhale. So in order to quantify COPD, you have to have a deficiency in your ability to get air out in the first second. Usually when you fall under 65 to 70%, you are getting into that COPD. And I think I have a slide of what a curve looks like with COPD, and that would be the lengthening of the curve. Normally you like to see a nice rapid rise. Here you see obstruction as the lung takes a long time to get that air out of your lung. And also the volume is decreased because the lung has been hyperexpanded. So this long expiratory volume shows that that person, if that had that breathing curve, would have COPD by the nature of the long thing. A restricted lung disease is basically one that basically can get the same air out in the first second, but they don't have the ability to take a deep breath, and that can cause by arthritis, it can cause by a lot of other conditions. So, and then we have mixed components, which is obviously a really flat curve, and we can come back and talk about that later. At any rate, we're going to go to another break. Thank you again for tuning in tonight. We'll be back, and then during the last portion of this talk, we'll be taking some calls, and that number will flash up. And again, Pahrump, thank you for tuning in to the Independent Doctors of Pahrump.